Hosea 5:15. I will go and return to my place until they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early. The following sermon by Jonathan Edwards is called, God Makes Man Sensible of Their Misery Before He Reveals His Love and Mercy. In the preceding part of the chapter, it threatened the destruction of Ephraim. Ephraim and the prophets generally means the 10 tribes or the kingdom of Israel as distinguished from the kingdom of Judah. When we read of Ephraim and Judah in the prophets, thereby is meant the whole people of Israel, of the 12 tribes, as in verse 12. Of this chapter, therefore will I be unto Ephraim as a moth, and to the house of Judah as rottenness. By Judah is meant the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin, which were under the king of Judah, and by Ephraim is meant the 10 tribes under the king of Israel. Ephraim is put for the whole kingdom of Israel because Samaria, the seat of the kingdom, the royal city, was in that tribe. In the verse immediately preceding the text, it is declared in what a terrible manner God was about to deal with Ephraim. Hosea 5 verse 14, For I will be unto Ephraim as a lion, and as a young lion to the house of Judah. Even I will tear and go away, and none shall rescue him. In the text, God declares how he would deal with them after he had torn as a lion and so on. And here, number 1, God declares how he would withdraw from them. I will go and return to my place. When I have torn as a lion, I will go away. I will leave them in that condition. I will depart from them, and they shall see no more of me. Number 2, what God will wait for in them before he returns to them to show them mercy. There are 3 things here signified. First, that they should be sensible of their guilt. Verse 15, till they acknowledge their offense. It is in the original, till they become guilty. That is, till they become guilty in their own eyes, till they are sensible of their guilt, in the same sense as the same expression is used in Romans 3 verse 19. That every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. That is, become guilty in their own eyes. Number 2, that they would be sensible of their misery, implied in the expression Hosea 5 verse 15. In their affliction they shall seek me. Their calamity was brought upon them before God had torn them and left them. But in their pride and perverseness they were not well sensible of their own miserable condition, as this prophet observes in chapter 7 verse 9. Number 3, that they should be sensible of their need of God's help, which is implied in their seeking God's face. In seeking him early, that is, with great care and earnestness. Before, they would not seek God. They were not sensible of their helplessness, as we learn in the verse, but one preceding the text, Hosea 5:13. When Ephraim saw his sickness, and Judah his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian, and sent to King Jacob. But as we were there told, he could not heal him nor cure his wound. And notwithstanding all the help he could afford, God wounded him, tore him as a young lion, and as he declares would leave him, and he should cease going to any other, and should be sensible that no other could heal, and accordingly come to him for healing. Doctrine. That it is God's manner to make men sensible of their misery and unworthiness before he appears in his mercy and love to them. That it is ordinarily thus with respect to the bestowment of great and signal mercies, and also that it is particularly so with respect to revealing his love and mercy to their souls. First, this is God's ordinary way before great and signal expressions of his mercy and favor. He very commonly so orders it in his providence, and so influences men by his Spirit, that they are brought to see their miserable condition as they are in themselves, and to despair of help from themselves or from an arm of flesh before he appears for them, and also makes them sensible of their sin and their unworthiness of God's help. This appears from the account which the Scriptures give us of God's dealing with his people. Joseph, before his great advancement in Egypt, must lie in a dungeon to humble him and prepare him for such honor and prosperity. The children of Jacob, before Joseph reveals himself to them, and they receive that joy and honor and prosperity which were consequent thereupon. They pass through a train of difficulties and anxieties till at last they are reduced to distress, and are brought to reflect upon their guilt, and to say that they were verily guilty concerning their brother. God humbled them in his providence, and then an end was put to all their difficulties, and their sorrow was turned into joy upon Joseph's revealing himself to them. Jacob, before he hears the joyful news of Joseph's being yet alive, must be brought into great distress at the parting with Benjamin and supposed loss of Simeon. He was reduced to great straits in his mind. He says in Genesis 42, verse 36, all these things are against me. But soon after this, he had these gladsome tidings brought to him. Genesis 45, verse 26. Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And to confirm it, he sees the wagons and the noble presents, which Joseph sent to him, so that he was now brought to say, verse 28, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive, and I will go and see him before I die. And so with the children of Israel in Egypt, their bondage must wax worse and worse and more extreme. Their bondage had been very extreme, but yet Pharaoh gives commandment that more work should be laid upon them. And the taskmasters tell them they must get their straw where they can find it, and nothing of their work should be diminished. And quickly upon this was their deliverance. So when the children of Israel were brought to the Red Sea, the Egyptians pursued them, and were just at their heels, and they were reduced to the utmost distress. They see that they must assuredly perish unless God work a miracle for them. For they were shut up on all sides. The Red Sea was before them, and the army of the Egyptians encompassing them round behind. And they cried unto the Lord. And then God wonderfully appeared for their help, and made them pass through the Red Sea, and put songs of deliverance into their mouths. So before God brought the children of Israel into Canaan, he led them about in a great and terrible wilderness through a train of difficulties and temptations for 40 years, that he might teach them in their dependence on him, and the sinfulness of their own hearts. Deuteronomy 32, verse 10. He found him in a desert land, and in a waste howling wilderness he led him about. He instructed him, he kept him as the apple of his eye. God brought them into those trials and difficulties in the wilderness to humble them, and let them see what was in their hearts, that they might be convinced of their own perverseness by the many discoveries of it under those temptations, so that they might be sensible that it was not for their righteousness that God made them his people and gave them Canaan, seeing it was so evident that they were a stiff-necked people. Deuteronomy 8, verses 2 and 3, and thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, and to prove thee, and to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. And he humbled you and suffered you to hunger, and fed you with manna which you knew not, neither did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. And in verses 15 through 17, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, in which were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought you forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed you in the wilderness with manna which your fathers knew not, that he might humble you, and that he might prove you to do you good at the latter end. And you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. And so we have examples of this from time to time in the history of the judges. When Israel revolted, God gave them into the hands of their enemies. He let them continue in their hands till they were reduced to great distress. and saw that they were in a helpless condition, and were brought to reflect on themselves and to cry unto the Lord. And then God raised them up a deliverer. And when they cried unto God, he would not deliver them until he had humbled them, and brought them to their own unworthiness, and to own that they were in God's hands. Judges 10, beginning with the 10th verse. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, saying, We have sinned against you, because we have forsaken our God, and also served Baal. And the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Did not I deliver you from the Egyptians, and from the Amorites, from the children of Ammon, and from the Philistines? The Zidonians also, and the Amalekites, and the Maonites did oppress you. And you cried to me, and I delivered you out of their hands. Yet you have forsaken me, and served other gods. Therefore I will deliver you no more. Go and cry to the gods which you have chosen. Let them deliver you in the time of your tribulation. And the children of Israel said to the Lord, We have sinned. Do thou to us whatsoever seems good to you. Deliver us only, we pray you, this day. And they put away the strange gods from among them, and served the Lord. And his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. And this is the method in which God declared from the beginning he would proceed with his people. Leviticus 26, verse 40, and so on. If they shall confess their iniquity, and the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass, which they have trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and that I have also walked contrary unto them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and they then accepted the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. The land also shall be left to them, and shall enjoy her Sabbath, while she lies desolate without them, and they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, even because they despised my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. And yet, for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will, for their sakes, remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I have brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. It is God's manner, when he will bestow signal blessings in answer to prayer, to make men seek them and pray for them with a sense of their sin and misery, as in 1 Kings 8:38 and 39. What prayer and supplication soever be made by any man, or by all your people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart, and spread forth his hands toward this house, then hear thou in heaven your dwelling place, and forgive, and do and give to every man according to his ways, whose heart you know. For you, even you alone, know the hearts of all the children of men. By knowing the plague of their own hearts is meant both their sin and misery. Insensible of their misery is included, as is evident from the manner of expressing the same petition of Solomon's prayer, as it is related in 2 Chronicles 6, verse 29. Then what prayer or supplication soever shall be made of any man, or of all your people Israel, when every man shall know his own sorrow and his own grief, by which is probably meant his misery and his sin, which is a foundation of it. Paul gives us an account how God brought him to have despair in himself before a great deliverance, which he experienced, 2 Corinthians 1, 9 and 10. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God which raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death. How did Christ humble the woman with Canaan, or bring her to the exercise and expression of a sense of her own unworthiness, before he answered her and healed her daughter, when she continued to cry? After he answered her not a word, and seemed to take no notice of her, and his disciples desired him to send her away, and when she continued crying after him, he gave a very humbling answer, saying, It is not fit to take the children's bread, and to cast it to dogs. And when she took it, well, it's only that being called a dog was not too bad. She realized that being called a dog was not too bad, and knowing that she was therefore unworthy of children's bread, she only sought the crumbs. Then Christ answered her request. And the experience of God's people in all ages corresponds with those examples. It is God's usual method before remarkable discoveries of His mercy and love to them, especially by spiritual mercies, and in a special manner to humble them, make them sensible of their misery and helplessness in themselves, and of their vileness and unworthiness, either by some remarkably humbling dispensation of His providence or influence of His Spirit. We are come now in the second place to show particularly that it is God's manner to make men sensible of their misery and unworthiness before He reveals His saving love and mercy to their souls. The mercy of God, which He shows to a sinner when He brings him home to the Lord Jesus Christ, is the greatest and most wonderful exhibition of mercy and love, of which men are ever the subjects. There are other things in which God greatly expresses His mercy and goodness to men, many temporal favors, the mercies already mentioned, which God bestowed upon His people of old, His advancing Joseph in Egypt, His deliverance of the children of Israel out of Egypt, His leading them through the Red Sea on dry land, His bringing them into Canaan and driving out the heathen from before them, His delivering them from time to time from the hands of their enemies, were great mercies. But they were not equal to this of His people from under the guilt and dominion of sin. Several of them were typical of this, and as God would thus prepare men for the bestowment of those less mercies by making them sensible of their guilt and misery, so especially will He so do before He makes known to them this great love of His in Jesus Christ. When God designs to show mercy to sinners, it is His manner thus to begin with them. He first brings them to reflect upon themselves, and consider and be sensible what they are and what condition they are in. What has already been said proves this. There is a harmony between God's dispensations, and as we see that this is God's manner of dealing with men when He gives them other great and remarkable mercies and manifestations of His favor, it is a confirmation that it is His method of proceeding with the souls of men when about to reveal His mercy and love to them in Jesus Christ. 1. God makes men consider and be sensible of what sin they are guilty. Before, it may be, they were very regardless of this. They went on sinning, and never reflected upon what they did, never considered or regarded what or how many sins they committed. They saw no cause why they should trouble their minds about it. But when God convinces them, He brings them to reflect upon themselves. He sets their sins in order before their eyes. He brings their old sins to their minds so that they are fresh in their memory, things which they had almost forgotten, and many things which they used to regard as light offenses, which were not wont to be a burden to their consciences, nor to appear worthy to be taken notice of, they are now made to reflect upon. Thus they discover of what a multitude of transgressions they have been guilty, which they heaped up till they are grown up to heaven. There are some sins especially of which they have been guilty, which are ever before them, so that they cannot get them out of their minds. Sometimes when men are under conviction, their sins follow them, and they haunt them like a specter. God makes them sensible of the sins of their hearts, how corrupt and depraved their hearts are. And there are two ways in which He does this. One is by setting before them the sins of their lives. They are so set in order before them, they appear so many and so aggravated that they are convinced what a fountain of corruption there is in their hearts. Their sinful natures appear by their sinful lives. There is sin enough, which every man has committed, to convince him that he is sold under sin, that his heart is full of nothing but corruption, if God by His Spirit leads him rightly to consider it. Another way which God sometimes makes use of is to leave men to such an internal workings of corruption under the temptations which they have in their terrors and fears of hell. It shows them what a corrupt and wicked heart they have. God sometimes brings this good out of this evil to make men see the corruption of their nature by the workings of it under temptations, which they have in their terrors about damnation. God leads them through the wilderness to prove them. and let them know what is in their hearts, as he did the children of Israel, as we have already observed. By means of the trials which the children of Israel had in the wilderness, they might be made sensible what a murmuring, perverse, rebellious, unfaithful, and idolatrous people they were. So God sometimes makes sinners sensible what wicked hearts they have by their experience of the exercises of corruption while they are under conviction of sin. Not that this will in the least excuse men for allowing such workings of corruption in their hearts, because God sometimes leaves men to be wicked that he may afterward turn it to their good, when he in infinite wisdom sees fit so to do. We must not go and be wicked on purpose, that we may get good by it. That would be very absurd, as well as horribly presumptuous for us so to do. Though God sometimes in his sovereign mercy makes those workings of corruption, and a spirit of opposition and enmity against God, a means of showing them the vileness of their own hearts, and so to turn to their good. So God oftentimes is provoked thereby utterly to withdraw and forsake them, after the example of those murmurers whose carcasses fell in the wilderness, of whom God sware in his wrath that they should never enter into his rest. And they who allow themselves therein are the most likely so to provoke God. But it is God's manner to show men the plague of their own hearts by some means or other before he reveals his redeeming love to their souls. While sinners are unconvinced, sin lies hid. They take no notice of it, but God makes the law effectual to bring men's own sins of heart and life to be reflected on and observed. Romans 7 verse 9. I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived. Then sin appeared and came to light, which was not before observed. Joseph's revealing himself to his brethren is probably typical of Christ revealing himself to the soul of a sinner, making known himself in his love, and in his near relation of a brother and a redeemer of his soul. But before Joseph revealed himself to them, they were made to reflect upon themselves and say, as in Genesis 42 verse 21, we are verily guilty. Number 2, God convinces sinners of the dreadful danger they are in by reason of their sin. Having their sin set before them, God makes them sensible of the relation which their sin has to misery. And here are two things of which they are convinced about their danger. First, God makes them sensible that his displeasure is very dreadful. Before they heard often about the anger of God and the fierceness of his wrath, but they were not moved by it. But now they are made sensible that it is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. They are made in some measure sensible of the dreadfulness of hell. They are led with fixedness and impression to think what a dismal thing it will be to have God, an enraged enemy, setting to work the misery of a soul, and how dismal it will be to dwell in such torment forever without hope. Isaiah 33 verse 14, the sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with a devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Other sinners are told of hell, but convinced sinners often have hell, as it were, in their view. They, being impressed with a sense of the dreadfulness of its misery, is the cause why it works upon their imagination oftentimes, and it will seem as though they saw the dismal flames of hell, as though they saw God in implacable wrath exerting his fury upon them, as though they heard the cries and shrieks of the damned. But secondly, they are made in some measure sensible of the connection there is between their sins and that wrath, or how their sin and guilt exposeth them to that wrath, of the dreadfulness of which they have such lively apprehensions, and so fear takes hold of them. They are afraid that they will be their portion, and they are sensible that they are in a miserable and doleful condition by reason of their sin. Many things in the Scriptures make it evident that this is God's method. The account we have of our first parents confirms it. They had a sense of guilt and danger before Christ was revealed to them. They were guilty and were afraid of God's wrath and ran and hid themselves. They were terribly afraid when they heard God coming. And doubtless their sense of their guilt and fear when they were brought before God, and were called to an account, and God asked them what they had done, and whether they had eaten of that tree in which he commanded them that they should not eat, prepared them for a discovery of mercy. God made them sensible of their guilt and danger before he revealed to them the covenant of grace. And it is probable that they are reflecting upon what God said about the seed of the woman bruising the serpent's head soon wrought faith. That it was not long before that discovery God made of a merciful design toward them was a means of true consolation and hope to them. Joseph's brethren were brought into great distress for fear of their lives before Joseph revealed himself to them. Those who were converted by Peter's sermon were first pricked in their hearts in the sense of their guilt and their danger, Acts 2, verse 37. And Paul, before he had his first comfort, trembled and was astonished, Acts 9, verse 6, and continued 3 days and 3 nights, and neither ate nor drank, which expressed his great distress. The jailer, before he was converted, was in terror. He called for a light and sprang in and came trembling and fell down before Paul and Silas. Acts 16, verses 29 and 30. Christ's invitation is made more especially to the weary and heavy-laden, which doubtless has respect, at least partly, to laboring and being weary with a sense of their guilt and danger. We read, when David was in the cave, and everyone who was in distress was gathered unto him, 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. This doubtless was written as typifying Jesus Christ, and referring to those who were in fear and distress unto him. The expression of flying for refuge while coming to Christ is signified, implies that before they come they are in fear of some evil. They apprehend themselves in danger, and this fear gives wings to their feet. Proverbs 18, verse 10. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The voice of God to a sinner when he gives him true comfort is a still small voice, but this voice is preceded by a strong wind and a terrible earthquake and fire, as it was in Horeb when Elijah was there, 1 Kings 19, 11, and 12. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. Another thing in the Scriptures which seems to evince this is a frequent comparison made between the church spiritually bringing forth Christ and a woman in travail and pain to be delivered. John 16, verse 21, and Revelation 12, verse 2. The conversion of a sinner is represented by the same thing. It is bringing forth Christ in the heart. Paul speaks of men's regeneration as of Christ being brought forth in them, Galatians 4, verse 19. And therefore Christ calls believers his mother, Matthew 12, 49 and 50. And he stretched forth his hand toward his disciples and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same as my brother and sister and mother. Hosea 5, verse 15, I will go and return to my place till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early, till they shall be guilty. They are made sensible of the desert of their sin, that their sin deserves that wrath of God to which it exposes them. They are not only sensible of the dreadfulness of God's wrath, how fearful a thing it would be to fall into the hands of the living God, and to sustain the eternal expressions of his fierce anger, as well as of the connection between their sins and this wrath, and how their sins expose them to it. But God is also wont, before he comforts them, to show them that their sins deserve this wrath, by a clear discovery of the connection between their sin and God's wrath. They are sensible of their danger of hell, of which many are in a measure sensible, who are wholly insensible of their desert of hell. The threatening of the law make them afraid indeed, that God will punish their sins. Yet they have no thorough apprehension of their desert or the punishment threatened, and therefore many who are afraid murmur against God. They charge him foolishly with being hard and cruel. But it is God's manner before he speaks peace to them and reveals his redeeming love and mercy in Jesus Christ. Make them sensible that they also deserve it. So in Matthew 18:24-26, and when he had begun to reckon, one was brought to him which owed him 10,000 talents. But forasmuch as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion, and loosed him, and forgave him the debt. Very commonly, when men are first made sensible of their danger, their mouths are open against God and his dealings. That is, their hearts are full of murmurings. But it is God's manner, before he comforts and reveals his mercy and love to them, to stop their mouths, and make them acknowledge their guilt, or their desert to the threatened punishment. Romans 3:19-20. Now, we know that what things soever the law says, it says to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. God would convince men of their guilt before he reveals a pardon to them. Now, a man cannot be said to be thoroughly sensible of his guilt till he is sensible that he deserves hell. A man must be sensible that he is guilty of death or guilty of damnation, to use a scriptural mode of expression, before God will reveal to him his freedom from damnation. A sense of guilt consists in two things: in the sense of sin, and in the sense of the relation which sin has to punishment. Now, the relation which sin has to punishment is also twofold. First, the connection which it has with punishment, by which it exposes to it and brings it, and secondly, its desert of punishment. When a man is truly convinced of his desert, to the punishment to which a sin exposes him, then he may be said to be thoroughly sensible of his guilt. Then is he become guilty in the sense of our text, and in the sense of Romans 3:20. Inquiry: how is it that a sinner is made sensible of his desert of God's wrath? A natural man may have a sense of this, though not the same sense which a person may have after conversion, because a natural man cannot have a true sight of sin and the evil of it. A man cannot truly know the evil of sin against God, except it be by a discovery of his glory and excellence, and then he will be sensible how great an evil it is to sin against him. Yet, it cannot be denied that natural men are capable of a conviction of their desert of hell, or that their consciences may be convinced of it without a sight of God's glory. The consciences of wicked men will also be convinced of the justice of their sentence and of their punishment at the day of judgment, and doubtless will echo to the sentence of the judge, and condemn them to the same punishment. Application. This subject admits of an application to unconverted sinners. If it be so, as has been represented, then let me exhort you to seek those convictions. Though you are at present sinners, and have no terrifying sense of your danger of hell, Yet I presume to say concerning most of you at least, that you do not intend to go to hell. When you happen to think about another world, you flatter yourself that in some way or other you shall escape eternal misery, or at least you do not think of it with a willingness to be damned. But if it be that you do not allow eternal damnation, you have a great work to do before you die. It ordinarily is a very difficult work, especially to those who have gone on for a considerable time in ways of wickedness under the means of grace. If ever you are truly converted, you must be convinced of your misery and unworthiness. You must be guilty in your own sins. Begin your work then, and seek to be made sensible of your misery and unworthiness. Make haste, and set about this work speedily. You may defer it so long that it will be too late. It may be too late if you delay in these two ways. It may be too late as you may be overtaken with death before you set about it, as thousands and millions have been before you. And if you should not die before you begin, yet it may be too late, as you may never have an opportunity to get through. Some persons are a long time under conviction of sin before they are converted. There are some whom God allows to continue a long time seeking salvation in their own strength, before he makes them despair of help from themselves. They continue many years, trusting in their own righteousness, as it were wandering from mountain to hill, from one hole to another, seeking rest and safety. They are a long time building castles in the air, and sometimes flatter themselves from one consideration, and sometimes from another. And if you should delay, there is a danger that you may not have time. Some are many years under fears of damnation, and are seeking salvation, and there are many for whom death is too quick for them. Here we will consider briefly what are the occasions of the stupidity and senselessness of sinners, and then shall take occasion to warn those who would seek the convictions of God's Spirit. 1. Some provoke God to withhold the strivings and convincing influences of His Spirit. Some provoke God to give them up to hardness of heart. God lets them alone and intends to let them alone. Hosea 4, verse 16. Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone. Psalm 81, 11 and 12. But my people would not hearken to my voice, and Israel would none of me. So I gave them up to their own heart's lust, and they walked in their own counsels.